The story begins with Nick Dunn, a laid-back man in his 40s on the morning of his 5th wedding anniversary. Instead of being excited about the day, Nick appears distant and uninterested. He skips getting a gift for his wife, Amy, and heads to a bar owned by his twin sister, Margaret. Noticing something's off, Margaret asks him what's wrong. All Nick says is, Amy. The film then flashes back to when Nick first met Amy. She was a successful writer known for her children's books, hosting a book event. Nick, who wrote for a small men's magazine, happened to attend. The two bonded over their shared love for literature. After the event, they wandered the streets of New York together. Nick used his charm to win Amy over, and they ended the night with a kiss and a romantic encounter. Back in the present, Nick gets a call from a neighbor saying his cat is outside. Confused, he rushes home and finds the front door open. Inside, the house is unusually quiet. He calls out for Amy but gets no response. Then he notices a broken glass table and becomes alarmed. He immediately contacts the police. Detective Rhonda and her partner arrive to investigate. They find small traces of blood in the house and begin to take the situation seriously, especially after realizing Amy is a public figure. At the station, Nick is questioned and given basic tests. Rhonda promises to track Amy's credit cards and mentions that a press conference will be held soon to ask for public help. Meanwhile, Nick doesn't seem as upset as expected. He even jokes about it being like an episode of Law and Order. This odd behavior catches Rhonda's attention. She starts asking Nick more personal questions about Amy, but he doesn't know basic things like her blood type, favorite food, or nickname. He claims Amy didn't have any close friends and mostly stayed home reading. This doesn't match what happens next. Another flashback shows their early marriage, filled with grand gestures, expensive gifts, and public intimacy. But their relationship slowly began to fall apart after that. Later, while searching the house again, a pregnant woman named Noel shows up, saying she was Amy's best friend and lives nearby. This contradicts Nick's earlier claim that Amy had no friends. Rhonda becomes more suspicious, but tells Noel they'll talk later. Inside the house, the forensic team reveals something disturbing. The kitchen floor had a lot of blood that was cleaned up. They also find out the entire house is legally owned by Amy. The next morning, the press conference for Amy's disappearance is held. Since Amy is a well-known author, the media shows up in full force, with cameras broadcasting the event live. Nick attends with Amy's parents. When it's his turn to speak, he says only a few words and oddly smiles for the cameras, something that doesn't go unnoticed. Later that night, Nick drives to his father's vacant house to get some peace. But he's surprised when Detective Rhonda shows up. She had been tailing him. Frustrated, Nick asks her to leave and quickly drives off. The story flashes back again, showing Nick and Amy struggling in their marriage. They've moved to Nick's hometown in Missouri to care for his sick mother. Months pass, and Nick still hasn't found work. Amy begins borrowing money from her wealthy parents to support them. Meanwhile, Nick wastes what little money they have on things like video games, which frustrates Amy. Amy starts keeping a journal, writing about how distant Nick has become. They argue often, and the stress in their relationship keeps growing. Back in the present, it's now 2 days since Amy vanished. Her parents organize a volunteer event to help find her. Nick shows up, but once again seems oddly disconnected. He even takes selfies with some of the volunteers. That evening, he stays at his sister Margaret's house to avoid reporters crowding his own home. Unfortunately, the media coverage is relentless. Margaret watches news reports criticizing Nick for his calm behavior, questioning whether he's even grieving. Upset, she confronts him about how he's coming across to the public. Nick snaps back, saying he just wants one night of peace after everything he's gone through. Margaret realizes she may have been too harsh and quietly apologizes before going to bed. Later that night, a young woman unexpectedly enters the house and runs into Nick's arms. She is revealed to be Andy, Nick's secret girlfriend. This moment changes everything. It becomes clear why Nick has seemed so indifferent to his wife's disappearance. But it also raises an alarming question. If Nick was cheating, could he have had something to do with Amy's vanishing? Nick spends the night with his secret girlfriend Andy. But the next morning, his sister Margaret walks in and catches them together. She's furious and scolds Nick for hiding the affair. Nick, frustrated, finally opens up and says that living with Amy had become unbearable. She had grown cold, and every day felt like a battle. That's why he found comfort in someone else, Andy, one of his former students. Margaret is shocked and warns him that if the police find out, it will make things even worse. She also shows Nick how the media is portraying him as suspicious and untrustworthy. In a flashback through Amy's diary, we learn she once wanted a baby, thinking it might fix their crumbling marriage. But Nick was completely against having children. During an argument, he pushed her in frustration. Though he apologized afterward, Amy felt frightened and began thinking about divorce. However, she believed Nick wouldn't let her go, especially because of her family's wealth. Back in the present, forensics confirms that the blood in the house belongs to Amy. Later, during another public event, Amy's supposed friend Noel suddenly accuses Nick in front of the crowd. She claims Amy was 6 weeks pregnant when she disappeared. The revelation shocks everyone, including Margaret, Andy, Amy's parents, and the crowd. Tensions rise, and Nick is quickly escorted away by police. That evening, Detective Rhonda questions Nick again. She now has evidence that Amy and Noel were indeed friends and that the blood at the scene was Amy's. Rhonda is convinced that Amy was murdered and Nick is responsible. All she needs now is a body. Later, Margaret asks Nick if the pregnancy claim is true. He's stunned. Amy had never told him anything about it and, as far as he knew, never wanted kids. Meanwhile, Detective Rhonda searches Nick's father's house and finds Amy's partially burned diary in the furnace. The pages reveal a shocking twist. Amy isn't missing or dead. She planned everything. She faked her own disappearance and framed Nick out of revenge. She felt betrayed by his lies, infidelity, and the loss of her independence. Amy had carefully orchestrated every detail, befriending a naive neighbor to steal a pregnancy sample, spreading false stories, and staging a bloody scene. Even the diary was part of the plan. Contrary to what it suggested, Amy had never been abused. In fact, she was the one in control. As Amy drives away from town, we learn she began plotting everything after catching Nick cheating. Nick starts to suspect he's being set up, but without evidence, he's helpless. He turns to Tanner, a top defense attorney. Tanner advises him to start shifting public opinion by exposing Amy's manipulative past. Step 1 is to find someone else Amy has wronged. Nick remembers Daisy Collins, a wealthy ex-boyfriend from New York. Their relationship ended badly, with Amy filing a restraining order. Daisy still writes to her, so Nick uses one of the letters to track him down. But Daisy refuses to criticize Amy. He still idealizes her. Meanwhile, Amy is living under a false identity in a rundown neighborhood. She tries to stay unnoticed, but when she accidentally reveals a stash of cash, some neighbors rob and assault her. Although they don't recognize her from the news, Amy knows it's time to flee. She calls Daisy. The two meet in a casino, where she spins a story about Nick being abusive and how she had to run away. Daisy, still obsessed with her, falls for it and takes her to his isolated lake house, promising to protect her. Back at home, Nick's legal team suggests a bold move. Confess to the affair on live TV. It might help him win public sympathy. But before he gets the chance, Andy tells the media herself. Tanner fears it's a disaster, but Nick insists on going ahead. On air, Nick gives an emotional interview. He admits his mistakes, shows remorse, and says, "I will always love my wife." Many viewers are skeptical, but Amy, watching from Daisy's villa, is moved. After 21 days of being missing, Amy makes a decision. She wants to return to Nick. But Daisy, expecting a future with her, has isolated himself completely. Amy realizes he won't let her leave peacefully. So she devises a new plan. She fakes injuries in the only camera-free spot in the house, bruises herself, and creates signs of assault. Then, when Daisy returns, she seduces him, only to murder him violently during the act. The next morning, a bloodied Amy appears on the doorstep of her and Nick's home, shocking the nation. Suddenly, Nick goes from suspected killer to innocent husband. Doctors examine Amy and confirm her story. She claims she was kidnapped and abused by Daisy. Nick knows it's all a lie, but he has no way to prove it. Amy gives a rehearsed statement to authorities, saying Daisy abducted her and held her hostage. The public cheers her return, and she becomes a media darling again. Only Nick and Margaret know the truth. The story ends with Amy and Nick back at home. Nick sees her as dangerous. Amy, however, says she did it all to save their marriage. Nick wants to leave, but Amy threatens to ruin his life if he does. Trapped, Nick realizes he's stuck in a nightmare. In the final scene, he tucks Amy into bed and quietly locks the bedroom door from the outside. He may be free from suspicion, but he no longer feels safe in his own home, bringing the movie to an end.